the underpinning structures that say we have to see who can be number one. The genuine alternative to being number one is not being number two. It's being able to dispense with these self-defeating rankings altogether. But a lot of people say, that's all nice to talk about, but what a charming thought. But competition is just part of human nature. It's usually with a shrug like this and a faintly patronizing smile, you know. What a charming thought. But unfortunately, it's just human nature to be competitive or aggressive or stubborn or territorial or lazy or selfish. Notice it's always the bad stuff. Nobody ever says, well, of course she helped him. It's just human nature to be generous. No, you don't say that. Which is why I've moved on from my work on competition and cooperation to my next book, The Brighter Side of Human Nature, which will be out in the spring, which deals with issues like altruism and empathy and the extent to which this too is a part just as real, just as natural of us. There's a lot of evidence there that's been collecting dust in the libraries. Let me talk briefly about competition, just an inevitable part of human nature. Well, the first question that occurs to me is, if it is, why are we spending so much bloody time training kids to be that way? Wouldn't that be redundant? What's the point? In fact, it's not redundant. I was giving a lecture once in a hotel, and I was riding the elevator down to the basement, and two boys, little boys in their swimming trunks, got on with their mother and some towels on their way to the pool, obviously, and she looked at them and said, so who's going to jump in the pool fastest? And they said, we both are. And I thought, how long can they hold out? Where does competition come from? We don't need innate theories. We have all the evidence we need in the way we subtly and not so subtly make sure that it's reproduced from generation to generation. You heard the evidence about nature. We can't appeal to nature in order to justify why competition exists. In fact, what happens typically, and the reason why, despite all of the evidence that has been around for quite a while that we just heard, the reason why we persist in this is not only watching those exciting nature documentaries on TV, which I watched, and I thought, well, nature is red in tooth and claw. Look at them going after each other. You know, it's more telegenic. I'm not suggesting those things on TV didn't really happen. It's not like they had highly paid stunt wolves or something. I mean, I'm sure it really happened. But it's not really what happens is that scientists live in this culture just like you and I do. We take our understanding about social interaction and project it onto nature and then read it back from nature to justify our own social and cultural practices. Frederick Engels said that 100 years ago, and it's no less true today. So you can't use nature. If you look at cross-cultural evidence, you find the same thing. There are some cultures without any competition, zilch, in recreation, in education, and in economics. Those cultures are sometimes called rather rudely primitive cultures, or as I prefer to call them, non-VCR cultures. And this doesn't mean that we can or should be like them. What it does mean is that we need another explanation besides our dark side or something innate about us to explain this stuff. As Erich Fromm pointed out, you know, these are the primitive cultures. If anything, we'd expect them to be closer to nature. So if it were in human nature to be competitive and aggressive, they should be more so, not less so. And that's exactly right. That's exactly right. Even among Western industrialized countries, there is a range of competitiveness, and I think that's important to understand. Early childhood learning experiments show the same thing. Experimenters go in with kids, teach them how to cooperate in learning or in games. They come back, other experimenters come back, different task, weeks or months later, the kids have absorbed it. They like it. They retain it. All of this is very good evidence against the idea. By the way, an idea I have not been able to find a shred of evidence. I have been working on this topic for about 7 years, and I have not found a shred of evidence to support this common assertion that competition is just part of human nature. And I went looking for it in a lot of disciplines. Now, with aggression, we find a similar topic. I'll be very brief about this. The fact is that aggression isn't universal either. And even if it were, we cannot conclude from universality that it's in the genes. That's just a clever and facile and easy way to explain away things. Certainly there are some parts of the brain that, when stimulated, make people more aggressive, or animals, but that doesn't mean that it is a matter of self-enclosed organisms with a self-contained reservoir of aggressive energy that has to be let out somehow. That notion popularized by Freud and Konrad Lorenz, has been more decisively refuted than any other single old wives' tale I am aware of with respect to human behavior. It just is false. The idea of aggression being part of our nature and thus unavoidable makes about as much sense as saying that because oxygen blankets the earth and fires need oxygen, that it's in the nature of the planet for buildings to burn down. It makes no sense. It's a matter of environmental situations, even for animals, in ways that I won't get into now. And the idea that war is just part of human nature, which Donald Granberg may talk about later, who's done some very interesting research on beliefs about this, is even more absurd. Rousseau said, "War is not a relation between man and man, but between state and state. And individuals are enemies accidentally." That's why all that amazing propaganda stuff Sam Kean showed us is necessary. As he points out in his book, I think very trenchantly, in Faces of the Enemy. You need this propaganda because otherwise we won't be inclined to kill. There's no innate need for an enemy. There's a need to understand social and political and economic structures and why states get involved in this sort of process. But even if we move beyond aggression and beyond competition to look at human nature more generally, I think we should be very careful about the way we use that phrase. Cui bono? Whom does it benefit? I want you to, if you remember nothing else of what I say this afternoon, I hope you'll remember this. That human nature arguments are profoundly conservative arguments masquerading as realism. It is a way of silencing dissent. That is the way human nature arguments have historically been used, and not by accident. I like your idea for changing the way we do things, but unfortunately the way we do things has been legislated by nature. It's just the way life is. Why do we think this? Well, for one thing, it's the easiest assumption available to us. If you look around and you see everybody around you, in Chevy Chase, or Alexandria living in a particular way, you say, well, it must be human nature to live this way. For another thing, the people turning out the studies have been trained in terms of genes and hormones and neurotransmitters. And as Abe Maslow used to say, if you give someone a hammer, they'll treat everything they come across as if it's a nail. That's exactly what goes on in the National Institute. And the media are partly responsible. And to the extent I write articles, I have, for popular culture, I have tried to make a point of addressing this fact. The Seville Statement, which is quoted in your pamphlet for this, the 1986 meeting of people from more than a dozen countries, experts in all social and natural sciences, came to a meeting in Seville in 1986 and concluded that aggression is not an innate, fixed part of human nature. Did you hear about that before this? Have you heard about the Seville Statement? I sure as hell hadn't. That's because nobody in the media was interested in covering it. One of the organizers of that, David Adams at Wesleyan, told me that when he went to talk to reporters about the importance of this finding, one of the reporters said to him, "Call us back when you find a gene for war." That's the bias that we keep getting. Jeff Goldstein at Temple University says, if all you know about aggression is what you see on TV, what you know is 19th century biology. That's what we get. And that's what we get among the good science reporters, who seem to have their critical faculties paralyzed every time they see the word neurotransmitter. It explains everything. There are many other complex reasons I won't get into now. But not only do we assume there is a fixed human nature, we also assume there's a bad human nature. It's a two-step argument. The first is a kind of crass biological determinism that you get from Ann Landers all the way to the head of the American Psychiatric Association. And the other is the specific belief that this nature we have is fundamentally flawed. You'll recognize some of the contributors to that in various ideologies, ranging from orthodox psychoanalysis to Konrad Lorenz to the notion of original sin, for that matter. But we see it in other respects, too. One of the nicest points about this was raised in an article that appeared in Science in 1972, which I think is just terrific, by Leon Eisenberg. Eisenberg put it very well. He said, "To believe that man's aggressiveness or territoriality is in the nature of the beast is to mistake some men for all men. contemporary society for all possible societies, and by a remarkable transformation to justify what is as what needs must be. Social repression becomes a response to, rather than a cause of, human violence. Pessimism about man serves to maintain the status quo. It is a luxury for the affluent, a sop to the guilt of the politically inactive, a comfort to those who continue to enjoy the amenities of privilege. He said it better than I can. This is not only a mistaken belief, but a politically loaded belief. The reasons for this, again, much too complex to go into in much depth. Number one, we're simply exposed to this stuff a lot. There was an interesting series of studies done by Harvey Hornstein in New York a while ago, in which he had subjects exposed to a radio news report, what they thought was a radio news report, about something really evil and dastardly that had just been done, robbing some old lady and mugging her and so on. And others happened to hear in another experiment about, or rather another condition of the same experiment, about those who heard an act of charity. And then what they had heard accidentally contributed to what they thought when asked about human nature. The people who had heard about the charitable action in the background noise behaved more cooperatively in a game, expected more cooperation from others, judged a defendant innocent more likely, recommended a more lenient sentence, and believed that people in general were more honest and helpful. I think something else is that it's cool to be cynical. You know, you really run a risk. You're right out there with your guts hanging out if you say, I think there's something good here, that empathy is, that helping is as natural as hurting. Dostoevsky said, one of his characters said, the higher the stage of development a man reaches, the more prone he becomes to cynicism, if only because of the increasing complexity of his makeup. I think a lot of us believe that. To be cool, you know, in the sense of fashionable, is also to be cool in the sense of disdainfully skeptical. And then there is the false dichotomy. I think we set up a situation in which, on the one hand, are these smiley-faced Pollyannas where everything's lovely and human nature is terrific and anybody who acts badly just hasn't gotten in touch with his or her real nature and so on. Arranged from Carl Rogers to Mr. Rogers here. And then on the other hand, you've got the people, and they are in the majority in this culture, which is why I train most of my fire on them, is the people who say that we're basically bad by nature. We have to eliminate this false dichotomy. We have to understand that we're not denying the real evil that is done in our society and in other societies by affirming that there is more to us than just the competitiveness and the aggressiveness and the selfishness. In other words, it's time we debunk the debunkers. Well, these are very big questions, and I feel like by skipping over on so much territory, I have skipped over too much. But I will be around for the next couple of days and would invite those of you who don't get a chance to ask your question now to do so then. I think the overall message I'm trying to urge with respect to competition and the notion of human nature in general is that not only should we change, but we can. Thank you.